Hello, hello, hello. Or as my Australian friends say, hello, hello, hello. I can't do it exactly perfectly, but I love to try. Welcome to this episode of the Presence Posse Presents. And what the Presence Posse is presenting today is Presence and the Money Myth. Presence and the Money Myth. And what do we mean by that? Some of you might already know, and some of you not. But we are today Danielle McMahon and Miriam Siegel, and we hope that you will become somewhat more enlightened about presence and the money myth by the end of today's talk. So, Danielle, do you want to say anything? Would you like me to sort of just blurt it out, or do you want to sort of play a little bit with the topic?
Well, I
Right.
can start a little bit. That was my first question. So, what is the money myth? So, I wasn't familiar with that terminology, whatever. And certainly I've heard that money can't buy happiness, or the myth is that it can, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. So, I've heard it can't buy happiness. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is the country song that says, I've heard it can't buy happiness, but it can buy me a boat, and it can buy me a truck, and it can buy me a trailer to pull it. So it's interesting to dive into, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, there are all kinds of myths or sayings or whatever about money. Another one is money doesn't grow on trees.
Hmm.
You've heard that one as well. And I mean, anybody who's watching, you are welcome to bring on the money slogans and all kinds of whatever quips and jargon and whatever we hear or were brought up to believe about money. I thought I would start right away by sharing an example from someone we both know, actually, a coach that you and I know,
Hmm.
who, after a while, started earning a fair amount of money. So went from earning, I don't know how much money, but not so much, and to earning a substantially larger amount of money, and actually began talking about the difference, his experience of that, and how this idea of money can't buy happiness, in his opinion, having had the experience, was wrong. So that he had experienced that having more money at least made life a lot easier,
Hmm.
which can result in a feeling of more happiness, joy, whatever you want to call it. I mean, when life becomes easier, it's natural to think of it as or experience it as better.
Yes, well, I certainly think that it gives you more choices,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no, what's the word I'm looking for? Like set experience for everyone, right? Like perhaps before he gained money, he also gained a sense of himself as being content within himself. Because the other thing I've heard is that if you're an unhappy, angry person, you're going to be that whether you have money or you don't have money. Right? Like the money is not going to change that aspect of your self unless you change that aspect of yourself. That's just another tool that we have to experience those more um, perhaps joyful things in life. Yeah.
That is an excellent point because I know that several of us have brought up that experience of working with people who seemingly have got it all and they've made it and they're miserable.
Hmm.
So, generally speaking, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts around, since we've been um, planning to do this topic today, I've been having thoughts around why we're told things. So, this
Hmm.
idea of money can't buy happiness, is that what people who didn't have a lot of money said to themselves and their children and their friends and whatever to make themselves feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Because that can certainly be the case. Money doesn't grow on trees. Again, it's a sort of a lot of times we have expressions to make us feel better because we don't have something.
So sort of a sour grapes.
Well, kind of a, yeah, I mean, in a way it could definitely be sour grapes, but in a way it's more, I would think, a way of making yourself feel better. Like if you think money will solve your problems and you can't have more money, you need something to make yourself feel more at home in the world, more satisfied with your life. So
Mm.
if you tell yourself that having money won't make you happier, then you stop potentially being jealous of other people and wanting more money. But I mean, obviously, or generally speaking, I can't say obviously, I guess, but well, I did. But generally speaking, if I am always in the red and I'm desperate to pay my rent and I'm always running to try and figure out how to make the rent and how to pay my bills and how to feed my children and how to feed myself and how to take care of the parents and how to do all of these things. And life is kind of like a desperate run to try and get enough money every month. I would imagine that being able to have more, not only income, but predictable income would make a huge difference to how I experience being in the world and how I experience my life. Right.
Right. So if the myth is money can buy happiness, then it's not that. Right. So that myth is sort of predicated on if you don't have money, you're unhappy, right? And certainly at that level where you're living in a constant state of stress around not being able to meet your creature comforts, then you're going to find it very difficult to be happy. It
I
doesn't mean that
mean,
it can't be done, because it can,
of course it
right?
can. Yeah.
But it does require a certain amount of skill, right? To be able to not to have that sort of stress um, component to your
Mm,
life and not live in it.
yep. And I find that actually a really interesting point because there is the stress as motivation. And then there's stress as kind of like, I don't know, um,
Depletion.
yeah, that's a good word, I would say. Yeah, thank you. That's a good word. Because stress, fear, I mean, a lot of strong feelings, they can definitely motivate us to make changes in our lives, in which
Mhm.
case they can be considered positive. And the ability to not feel stress or not stress ourselves is probably the more correct way of putting it, because it's kind of like the time travel we talk about in the Presence Posse. It's you're worrying about your future based on your experience in the past or whatever. So you're time traveling, you're not staying in the present. Then, if you're able to stay present and not time travel, you don't actually need the stress as motivation necessarily. You are just present to what needs to be done and you do it. And this reminds me of um, once, it's not the same, but it's an example that may illustrate. We got a Facebook user who just says Facebook user. And sometimes, I mean, with StreamYard, you sign in and register. So I don't know who this is, but I'm suspecting it's Rosalie saying, I'm here. I'm here for it, which is great.
For all the money talk.
Yes, all the money talk. So it's a different example, but it's an example of how presence can make a humongous difference. When I
Mhm.
lived in Spain, I was going to the airport for my flight home. I was moving from Spain and moving on from Spain. And got into a traffic jam. I'm on a bus and the traffic just basically stopped. Now, my landlady, beautiful woman that she was, she accompanied me to the airport.
Aw.
And my, at the time, boyfriend also was going to the airport. So, yeah, isn't that lovely? And she was, I mean, unfortunately for her in a way, because she could not sit still. It was
Oh.
like I'm kind of grateful to not have been in her body because she was so stressed. She was beside herself, as the expression goes, and hopping up and down and running up and down the aisle and twisting and turning. The poor woman. And my, at the time, boyfriend was also squirming. And I was dead calm. I was dead calm because for me, there was nothing I could do. Worrying wasn't going to change anything.
Right.
Making stuff in my head, oh, I'm going to miss the plane and I'm going to, and that whole thing, future projection and whatever in a not so positive way, wasn't going to help. It wasn't going to change the traffic. The only thing I could consider was, is there another way around this? And for that kind of thinking, I needed to be present to what was.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let me see what's going on. Is there anything more I can glean from this? Is there anything else I can do? No. So then I just sat calmly on the bus and then watched what was going on. And that's kind of what I mean by, if you're stressed to pay the bills and you don't have enough money for food and all of those things on Maslow's triangle, right? Whereas like you have survival stuff is at the base of it all. No amount of worrying about it really is going to change the situation, with the exception of being able to use the stress as motivation to help you. And then, I mean, I open for that possibility. However, my experience is when I am present to what is, I don't need that stress. I see possibilities kind of show up. They make themselves clear because I'm in what is right now and not anywhere else. So, I mean, we actually made it to the plane on time, just on time, and I was still fine. And everything got done the way it needed to. And we may have been late because I've seen that happen as well. And then something else happens. And it's like, again, what I often come back to, and I could handle it. Right? I could handle it.
So how old were you when this happened?
I was 26.
Yeah, see, I don't think I figured that out till much later. I think I was in my mid-30s, perhaps, when I had what I called the week from hell. And it was just one thing after another, right? That week, my husband got laid off, a horse got sick. I ended up having to put her down. And it was the first time that I'd had a horse get that sick. And it was very emotional and very difficult. And my dog that I'd had for a few years killed one of my cats. So I had to get rid of my dog. And it was just, one thing after another all week long. And they were all very emotionally charged, very stressful for me to get through. And probably by the end of that time, I was pretty exhausted and ill and just feeble, right? Like this was so much. And then I would say the next time that it started to snowball like that in my life was the first time that I made the decision, I'm not going to make myself sick over this. I am not going to worry myself sick. It doesn't help. And it doesn't contribute to my being able to handle it. But it took that extreme situation for me to actually for it to land for me, that all of those things were a choice. Yes, I have an emotional reaction, but I can handle it. I can just grieve the loss of the horse and the loss of my dog, and I can allow those emotions to move and not to be stored up, right? So that it's the same kind of thing, and part of that was financial, certainly. Like, this is costing me money as well as, and my husband lost his job, and what am I going to do to pay my bills and to keep, and what's he going to do, and what's my part in what he does, and how do I support him through this when I'm also going through all of these things. And I do think I remember saying at some point during that time that um, God has overestimated me.
Mm.
Right? Like, if God will only give you what you can handle, God has overestimated me. And one of my friends said, no, no, you can handle this, and at the time I heard it, but it didn't really land in a way that I could implement it. I mean, I could believe that she believed, but I was still sort of in the midst of that. And so I think it does take some experience to be able to, and maybe some success in surviving, right? Like, there's a post that I see from time to time that I really love. Like, if you're having a hard day, think about your track record of surviving hard days. It's 100% because you're still here, right? So that helps if you have walked through a few things and you can look back and say, well, I have been financially stressed and I have been okay. Then you can begin to be happy regardless of the appearance of financial stress in your life. But if you haven't had those experiences, if you're a young adult stepping out on your own, then it's very likely that it's going to feel like you can't handle it, right? Like, you have to have some experience of actually handling it, actually surviving it, actually hopefully improving those things, and being able to trust in being present as one of the most productive things you can do in that moment. But it's not something we're taught. So how did you learn that at such a young age?
Well, I was not taught it. I have been fortunate to have begun reading and been very interested in, like, psychology and mindset and all that kind of stuff. And we didn't call it mindfulness back then. Everything was called meditation. When I was a kid, meditation was a pretty new thing where I was. And so but I just kind of understood it somehow, that it wasn't helping. Like, worrying about something didn't really make sense. It doesn't mean I don't ever worry. It just didn't make sense because it didn't change anything other than the way I felt. And if I could not feel that bad, and I could choose to not feel that bad, why wouldn't I want to do that? Right. I mean, and I, with all due respect, I was brought up in a very chaotic world. And so I was used to a lot of chaos. And what was typical for me was to choose some sort of chaotic way of being and feeling because it was familiar. And it took a while for me to understand that that was the habit and that I could change the habit. I didn't have to keep choosing the chaos and the worry and all of that sort of drama and everything. And that there's a transition period, or whatever you want to call it, from chaos and drama and worry and all of that to joy and possibilities and that kind of thing. And that can feel really boring. And boring can feel really unfamiliar. It's like, okay, nothing's exploding. So, well, this is dull. So then we can tend to sort of lean back towards the what was exciting, even though it's not good for us, because we don't get through the transition period going to the joy part. It's, oh wow, this is way better.
Yeah.
So though,
And
and the
see,
experience on the bus was that it was like I was able to stay in that beautiful, calm place and observe the others not being there. And that in itself was enough of an indication that I would rather have this than that.
hmm,
Keep choosing this. I'm going to let you, because I know you were going to say something. I just want to bring up, with all due respect, when we use the expression, and I'm not a fan of the expression, life doesn't give us more than we can handle. My opinion and my experience of it is, yes, it does. Sometimes it does. People do commit suicide. People do
mhm,
end up in psychiatric institutions because they've gotten more than they were ready to handle, or they don't know how to handle, so they choose to leave. I mean, there are many situations. So again, I
right,
just want to show respect for that. It doesn't mean that we should just sort of make assumptions about ourselves if we're not. If we need some help, we need some help.
right,
But the assumption that we can't handle is more what we're referring to. It's this idea that, okay, there's discomfort in a situation, but it doesn't mean I can't handle the situation. I may not like the discomfort in a challenge, but it doesn't mean I can't handle it. When things don't go my way, it just means they're different.
hmm,
How I approach that is with or ooh or hmm or
hmm.
many things in between. So I just wanted to make that clear, just for the people who may have experienced something quite different than what that particular expression would indicate.
Right. And that is the truth. Like, my home didn't burn. I wasn't homeless, right? So I had the resilience. They had seen me, known me long enough to know that I had the resilience. And that was a good reflection to me that somebody else believed in my ability to do this. And yeah, so I think that is true, that people do get overwhelmed. And I was talking to my sister, and she is considering in her retirement becoming a speaker, and she said, I don't know what my topic would be. And I said it would be resilience, because those things have happened in her life and she has been resilient. Like, obviously she didn't commit suicide, she's still here, right? But she has been hospitalized, and she has faced homelessness, and she has um, some estranged relationships. So there are many things that in her life that she has gotten through. And when we were talking, she said, I don't think of myself as resilient. I think of myself as an abject failure, basically, is what she told me. And I said, well, first of all, failure is an event, not a person.
Mhm.
And you've come back from all of them. That's resilience. That's the definition of it. And we, as sisters, have been around strong women, and we think this is normal, that we have this level of resilience. And it's not necessarily. Like, we just don't know what else to do except get up and go on, right? Like, that's all that enters into our thoughts. That's what we've been around. That's what we've experienced. That's what we've seen other women do in our family and our immediate environment, sort of. So we tend to take that for granted. That, and that was a very thought-provoking conversation for her, and I'm hopeful that she actually is going to share some of her resilience with people, because it's available,
Mm,
right? We
mhm.
can learn it. It's a skill. um, Yeah, and we can get help with that. Even my mom, in fairly recently, probably in her 80s, was speaking with her therapist, and said, I don't know how to handle some of this aging that I'm really not happy about. And her therapist said, "You're a very resilient person. And here's a list of what resilient characteristics are and what resilient people do." And she like had them posted, right? I think of my mom as being an amazing human being, but we all hit steps in our cyclical growth, because I feel like growth is never a straight line thing. You go through it and you go through it in a different way again, right? That we have to be reminded of the things that perhaps we do or that have done that actually work in our
Mm.
lives. And yeah, I don't think she hit that space that you were talking about, of realizing that she was raised in a chaotic environment and she brought that chaotic environment to her family, and so she raised her children in that chaotic environment. And then at some point in her career, so she would have been in her 50s probably, when she decided that her goal now was to be happily bored, right? Like that's the way she put it. I would say that would be to be content, but her definition at that point had to be happily bored, because it did feel so boring for her not to be in chaos. Right at that point is probably the first point in her life where she wasn't in a situation of being financially strapped. So
Yeah.
that allowed her the ability to look at her life differently. So, as you were talking about earlier with Maslow's levels there, if that survival isn't covered and you're constantly seeking to cover that, you don't go beyond that. Correct? Yeah. Yeah. So even well into her life, she hadn't gotten to a point where she could go beyond that. But then she learned, and
Yeah.
she actually started to enjoy life and do things that she wanted to do for herself and was able to do. So,
Yep. Yeah. We will unconsciously often stay in patterns. And if we're used to, of course, I'm generalizing, but if we're used to fighting for money, if we're used to money being scarce, and we think that that's what life is like, and this is what my life looks like and will continue to look like, we may unconsciously be creating that. And we don't necessarily see possibilities and possible solutions. And I was just thinking about how I, at one point in my life, had basically lost every friend I had, um, and basically the majority of the money I had. I was living with somebody, like paying for a room in a mobile home, um, where the man drank on occasion and would stop outside my door. Like my room was a bedroom. That's all it was, and it had a little desk in it, and then there was the common bathroom and everything. So he would stop outside my door, and I'd be sitting inside the room and just praying that he wouldn't come in, because I knew what he wanted. And I'm very grateful that he never actually did come in the room, but it was the idea that he wanted to, and I knew why. And so, of course, for me, I mean, I lived there because I didn't have a lot of money and I didn't have a lot of choice.
mhm.
And being in that position where, how long do I stay before he doesn't not come in? Right? How long is it going to take? How lucky am I going to
Right?
keep being? Right? And in my head, it was kind of like, well, I don't have any other choice. I don't have anywhere to go. And it's quite amazing how once I sort of decided in my body that I had to get out of there before it was too late, You get that sort of gut feeling like, I got to get out of here. I have to go do something else. Once I decided that that was the case, it was amazing how resourceful I got to find something else that did not involve being in the same situation that I was in. So not putting myself in another situation was like that, but
Right.
something else. And whether it meant having more than one job for a while, or asking people if I could sleep on their couch for a while, or whatever it entailed while I figured it out. And sometimes it's relying on the kindness of strangers, and sometimes, well, we don't always have an easy choice of whether or not to put ourselves in dangerous situations. But sometimes it's what we actually think is the only solution. We don't see another opportunity. We don't see another solution. So I got out of it. And fortunately for me, as speaking of resilience, I've been in situations that have been very challenging where I've been dead alone and gotten myself out of those as well. And sometimes just basically knocking on a stranger's door and taking a chance. Right? Sometimes that just has to be the way. So again, respecting that it's not always easy to get out of that kind of a situation where we don't have a lot of money and we don't have a lot of choices, seemingly. It's the ability to be curious about what else is out there that I'm not seeing and start asking those questions. Well, this is what I'm seeing as my choices. What else is there?
And that's where presence comes in, right?
Yeah.
If you are able to stay present and allow for that expansiveness, right? The expanded possibilities that are there, and to believe perhaps there are more possibilities than you can think of, and that perhaps they will come into your knowing if you stop thinking and stop efforting and stop trying to control what you can't control.
Yeah.
And that's,
And with all respect, again, sometimes, and I have done this, we stay in a situation that is not ideal for a while we're transitioning towards a better experience. Like sometimes it's, I don't want to say it's not possible, but it may be prohibitively challenging to just suddenly leave a situation. Sometimes it's amazing how sometimes we just do it. Something shows up and we have to, or we just suddenly just know that now I have to get out of here. But sometimes, like I have made that choice to stay in a situation for a while I was gaining the inner and outer strength to leave and do something else. And again, with presence, the idea, the ability to get curious about the moment I'm in and what possibilities are in that moment, no matter how hard it seems to be. It's kind of like this idea of what is that Eckhart talks about. I like Eckhart Tolle. I've said that before. What is. And the more I fight what is, the more difficult what is seems because I'm fighting it.
right. And that's why I tend to say, well, it is what you allow it to be.
Yeah.
Right. It is what it is, but the impact on you is what you allow it to be. If you just allow it to be as it is, that's totally different than if what is you allow to cause that fight or flight nervous system deregulation in your life, right? Like we're not taught nervous system regulation. We're not taught how to lean into possibility, and that's why Eckhart is a great teacher, because he sort of hit that wall and opened up into possibility, right? There's a whole different way of viewing the same world that I lived in yesterday today.
Mm.
And he was sort of blissed out for a while with that way
Yeah.
of viewing the world, right? And it was so different in his experience. And for some people, it happens that way, but for a lot of people, it doesn't. It happens in much smaller increments, right? And just because it's happening in much smaller increments doesn't mean we can't get there, doesn't mean we'll never have that experience. And I think a lot of times when and that came to my mind earlier, like the great sages of the world, if you will, mystics of the world, many of them have had no employment and no worries about finances and no money and no nothing, right? They just did what they did. And I believe Eckhart was living in somebody's basement while he wrote his first book and ran out of money before it was published. And there's many stories like that where exactly they lived on whatever showed up next, right? But most of us are not there.
Mm.
We are not that adept at living um, in presence
Mhm.
and trusting that we'll be cared for and our needs will be met and we'll be um, not put in dangerous situations for our human existence. Most of us are much more concerned with our creature comforts than to just live that way. Um, so we have to have a balance, I think, of believing in our ability to um, take care of ourselves and to be resilient, and also to believe that miracles might show up.
Mm.
They might happen. There's so many more possibilities than we've been taught. We've been taught to only do what's logical, what's reasonable, what's right. Like those are the things we're encouraged to do. We were certainly sort of the same era where you get a job, and if you're female, you get a husband, and you have children and family, and go to college, and or work for a big corporation and get a retirement and all of those things. And that's not necessarily even true anymore. Like,
Mm.
not that it was then, but for our parents, that was what success looked like,
Yeah.
right? And they wanted us to be successful, and they wanted us to be safe, and they wanted us to be happy, and all of those things look like you need to have a steady income. So yeah, all those things about money not growing on trees and having to have a work ethic and having to provide for yourself, and all those things are a very good intention, but not necessarily productive,
Mhm.
serviceable, what we want out of our lives. I mean, yeah, I think in the conversation we've gone more towards the mm, how to be happy without money, kind of. Then
Well,
we've
that is, I
got to how
mean,
to be happy with money.
yeah, because the myth about money doesn't buy happiness. Uh, Again, whatever your definition of happy is, I'm actually going to just make a point again. I mean, with all my ruining the negative points, um, this idea of maybe not a steady income, or like Eckhart living in somebody's basement and not and running out of money before the book is done, or whatever the situation is with people. We're not talking about freeloading and not taking responsibility for yourself. There's a huge difference in I don't want to, right?
Right.
And not taking responsibility for your own life and making sure that your life is good. And then like living on people's couches and having them feed you because you only want to have good experiences and feel good. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trust, at least this is how I understand it and my own experience. It is trusting in the moment. that I'm on the right path, and that I will get what I need or create what I need at all times. It may not look like some image I may have had, and it is what it is. It's there. So the idea of money buying happiness or not buying happiness, just to sort of segue back into that from that point, is what does happiness look like? If I am outside on a sunny day and the yellow light, I mean, it's gorgeous, right? And the sky is blue, and maybe there are a few clouds. So then you get these lovely colors of rainbowy kind of thing, even though it didn't rain. And you get the contrast between the sun slightly behind the cloud or just in the blue sky. And you're sitting in the rays and you're feeling the warmth in your body and all of that, and just bliss and flat broke, right? Because it's not about the money. It is, okay, where's my next meal going to come from? I do have to take that into consideration. So it's, again, taking responsibility for my situation and the possibility of enjoying basically every moment that is, because it is what it is. And even in my experience, even the darkest moments of my life had beauty in them, which if you'd asked me or said something like that to me when I was 15, I would have thought you were nuts.
Right.
But having had decades of experience with that, I'm not always happy about huge, whatever, tragedies or horrible shocks or whatever. And I always, and I mean always, find something beautiful. And it has nothing to do with money.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, I could say money can't buy happiness because it can't buy that happiness. However, if I see ease, for example, as happiness, comfort as happiness, absolutely, I totally agree with this friend of ours who experienced feeling greater ease and freedom, which can also be considered happiness, because he was earning more money.
Mm-hmm.
But there can be incredible joy in struggle, the struggle in connection with the growth. Like, what if I don't have enough money at the moment? What is this moment trying to teach me? Maybe it's trying to teach me that I have resources I haven't tapped into yet. Maybe it's trying to teach me I'm stronger. I'm resilient, as you mentioned, more resilient than I thought. It gives me an opportunity to look around more and not in the same place. So the struggle, to call it that, may be an incredible gift that has a great joy in it if I allow myself to be with it rather than fight against, I hate my life is horrible. Yeah. What if it isn't? What if it's just trying to show me something that I need to see?
Yeah.
To make a choice to bring in even more joy. Yeah, man's search for meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have other members of the Presence Posse that work with clients that they've repeatedly said have all the trappings, right? They got the good job, they got the fancy car, they got the good home life, whatever, and they are personally unhappy and they don't understand it because they've bought the myth. Right. So we can't so much talk to that directly as we know indirectly from them that these are some of their clients, because they can then teach them that the sitting in the ray of the sun, the being okay with where you are in life and the experience that you're having in this moment. It's not predicated on keeping this level of lifestyle, but that's something else that happens to people that hit a certain level of success monetarily, financially, then they worry about it. They worry about maintaining it. They worry about losing it. They worry, right? So they have these other emotions that take over that have nothing to do with their actual experience of life. They have to do with the trappings, right? The outer. It's all about looking good. It's all about keeping up with the Joneses, all of those other sayings that we have that I think when they're accepted, don't have any depth.
Mm.
Like they're just, it's okay to look good and not be okay. I mean, it's not okay to not to stay that way, right? Like it's okay to not be okay, but it's okay to move through that and become someone who can take care of themselves on a much different level. And I guess that's what the Presence Posse is trying to teach, right? Like it's not about the external circumstances of your life. They certainly have information for us that we can learn from and we can grow with and we can share with others, but they don't define us.
Yeah, yeah. You just had, I was just reminded of something. When I was younger, for a while, I wore a lot of makeup. I became very thin and I wore a lot of makeup because I didn't think I was worth anything without it.
Mm.
This was the thing, and this is what I'd been taught. You're thin, you have great clothes, you always look your best, you're made up, which of course creates a challenge because sometimes things happen. You cry, or it rains, or whatever, or you have hair like this that kind of lives its own life. Yeah. So that I couldn't always live up to the ideal of that I had set for myself, not realizing that I was doing that to myself.
Right.
I thought the world was like that. I thought that was the lot I had been dealt, and I had to keep that up all the time. And it's like, and I talk about, like, I've got my diamonds. I've got lots of diamonds. I've got lots of
Mhm.
gold. I've got my Louis Vuitton and my Chanel and my all of those things. And I've also got, like, my favorite purse for the longest time was this little $100 leather thing that was so good to touch. Like, I loved the feel of it. And it didn't matter the money. It was
Mhm.
just what it felt like, and even the leather, what it smelled like, and how good it was across. I like to wear them across, and that whole, and the freedom without having a big bag or what. I mean, there's so many things. It just, when it hit me that it was, at least for me, more about how I felt, how I was in the moment than what I had, that was a game changer.
Or what you looked like.
Or what I looked like, right? Because when I
Or-
decided I wasn't going to wear makeup after, I was just like, I went from tons of makeup to no makeup. And like right now, see, guys, I have no makeup and my hair is gray and I dyed my hair. I tried that. I just decided I was going to give it a shot. And then I stopped because ultimately it's all me. No matter what I put on myself, I'm still the same person and the moments are the same. And I create my moments. I can make them hell or heaven or whatever, depending on what I do with whatever is.
Yeah.
So sometimes I play and I put makeup on, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I put really fancy clothes on and go with my fancy things, and sometimes I don't. And whatever I do, I enjoy that. But the idea is, it isn't the things themselves. It is the experience I create and the experience in the moment of being in and with that. And the energy flowing through it. That is life, not the thing. I love how Eckhart talks about his car. We laughed really. There was a, so he was talking about somebody who drove a Ferrari. And he said, I love my car. And he's like, it's not a Ferrari. And I've had my car for a long time and I love it. And when it doesn't work anymore, then I'll get another car. And it's like, yeah, you can love what you have. And it could have been a Ferrari,
Right.
but it didn't necessarily mean that it was because it was a Ferrari. That was the point. It doesn't matter whether it was a Ferrari or a Volvo or whatever it was. It was the car and what it did for him and how it looked and whatever he found pleasing, not what it represented monetarily. And I love that.
Yeah, and I love that you use the expression of whether I'm in my fancy clothes or I'm in my dowdy clothes or whatever you want to call them, it's my enjoyment of it. That's right. That's what meets people, because you can believe that it's all about how you look and what you have. But if there's no joy in that, people see that.
Mm.
Not only do you know that there's no joy in your life, but it looks good, other people know it too.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're taught that we can put on this facade and we can, and people that are not sensitive to energy perhaps will look at you and say, oh, you look great. And if you agree with them that you're great, then they'll accept that, right? But there's no reason to try to deceive yourself
Mm.
or
Well,
others.
you might have a good reason, you think. But it's like, okay, you look great. So then I hear that and then I think, oh, I look great. And then I feel great because they think I look great. And that must mean I am great. I mean, it can really.
Right. And then you put all of your self-worth outside of yourself. And that's a very dangerous position to be in my opinion.
Yeah, because everybody decides you instead of
Right.
you being in control of you and creating you and being you.
Or even knowing you.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah.
that
And
was
I put
my
myself in court.
experience as a drug addict. Was I got to the point where I did not know me. Right. And I would ask people, they would say, are you okay? I don't know. Am I okay?
Mm.
If they said I was okay, then I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't even know how to check with myself at that point. It took some recovering to get to the point where I knew how I was doing, and I had more than 2 terms for it, right? And started to understand that often life is rather more complex than I was allowing it
Mm.
to my knowingness, right? Like it was just fairly flat, and my life is not like that anymore.
Mm.
It's much deeper, it's much more complex, and it's much more enjoyable. And that has nothing to do with how much money I do or don't have. And I think that is the myth of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, not discounting the possibility that having a lot of money can make life easier, can create a certain amount of freedom. It doesn't necessarily mean you feel happier. If your relationship isn't working, well, having a lot of money may mean that you can pay for a lot more therapy or maybe an even better therapist. That's a real possibility.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Or perhaps buy more expensive experiences, holidays or whatever, that can feel really good. But no matter what, it's still there's the yeah, freedom. There's still it's only going to get you so far. And the rest is up to you. I like what you mentioned about asking people how you feel. It's this, or the way we make ourselves or change ourselves or hide us. How many times do we get asked the question, how are you doing? And we say, oh, I'm fine. Or something's fine. Or someone says, what's anything that we don't, oh, nothing. And it's like, where along the line did it become okay for you to make the other person more important than you?
Yeah.
Right. And that's another topic for a whole nother posse talk. But it speaks to the idea of money and buying happiness, because if you're giving away the opportunity to create joy and happiness in your life, because you're making other people and their expectations more important than your experience of your life, and you're living your life, there's an imbalance in there. And it's a very important one to notice and pay attention to. And I mean, again, all respect to being in dangerous situations where it may be quite important to live by another person's rules for a certain extent of time until you can get away from there. But barring that, nobody can live your life for you. And the ultimate happiness, I would claim, is down to what's going on in here and what I create in my moments, and not what I create outside of my moments or what people bring to
Right.
me.
And not giving money the power to determine that.
Yes. Yes, very beautiful. Because money itself is not power. It's like we'll say, and again, another posse talk, knowledge is power. It's like, no, knowledge is knowledge. What you do with that knowledge can be powerful,
Right.
but knowledge itself is not power. So money is not the happiness. What you may do with it can create some feeling of happiness, but you're still creating it. It's in you. You're the one making the decision, calling the shots, really. And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it might take a while. Sometimes you need to sort of stop and look around for other opportunities. They're there. On that note, do you have something you would like to conclude with before we end today's talk, Danielle McMahon, on the subject or the subject of something else?
On the subject of something else, I am going to launch my Mastering the Brain game again, starting on March 17th. I haven't put that out on my social media yet, but that will be happening. And if you are interested in that, keep an eye on my Facebook page, and I will be posting about that.
Yay. And of course, you can put it in the posse, because now that you've talked about it, people might go to the posse group.
Yes, I can do that. I can put it under this video.
Yes. Okay. I mentioned last time that I'm playing around with a new model of coaching, and it is what I'm calling a power model. It is an intensive, almost daily working with me for a period of 12 weeks. And the idea being based on research that changing habits, building strengths, is more easily done when you are consistently following up. So, and there's some question as to how many hours, whether it's 21 days, or there has been research on it's actually 60 hours of practice to really, really install new habits. So I've created a coaching package on the power model that is almost daily working with me. And if that sounds interesting to you, please let me know. And I'm working on another couple of cool things, so stay tuned. We hope that you have found this talk enlightening, and maybe we've debunked some myths, but maybe we've actually created the opportunity for more questions in you. And if that is the case, you are more than welcome to ask them in the Presence Posse group, and we will respond to your comments there, and quite possibly create another talk based on something you may ask us. So please don't hold back. We like to hear from you. And thank you, all of you who have joined us live today. And for those of you who watch the replay afterwards, we're always happy to have you with us. And of course, thank you, Danielle McMahon, for a lovely and rousing talk on presence and the money myth, as we uncovered several money myths and even other myths. And it was a pleasure for me as well to be part of this talk. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you next week, where our topic will be the second part of our trilogy on money and prospering, which will be money, presence and scarcity. Presence and scarcity. And we touched in on it a little bit today, and we'll go even more into it next Monday. So welcome next week, and thank you for today. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening, week, and we'll see you next week.